On this edition of The Fifth Estate, it's everywhere. You can't escape it. High food prices are a reality, but are companies profiting?
They've passed on the higher costs that they themselves are paying, and then some.
MPs have tried to get an answer.
How much profit is too much profit? You're making more money than you've ever made.
Now it's our turn.
What's the worst case scenario? Complete removal from store shelves.
We've teamed up with APTN Investigates to find out what's going on with food prices. We go to a place where high prices are a fact of life.
I call it the Wild Wild West because anything goes pretty much.
And government efforts to lower prices may actually be adding to a company's bottom line.
It appears that the retailer may be keeping the extra money.
I'm Steven D'Souza. This is The Fifth Estate.
We're hoping for a productive meeting. Thank you.
The CEOs of Canada's big grocers are in the hot seat.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witness.
How much profit is too much profit? You're making more money than you've ever made. How much profit is too much profit?
We're a big company and the numbers are very large.
As an angry public and angry politicians look for answers about high food prices.
The idea that grocers are causing food inflation is not only false, it's impossible.
We at Empire are not profiting from inflation. It doesn't matter how many times you say it, write it, or tweet it. It is simply not true.
But for every question, the CEOs had an answer.
Our revenues have gone up, expenses have gone up, margins have not gone up. They've been stable for a long time, and food margins have actually declined. So those are facts.
The message from the big grocers was clear. They're coping with record inflation just like everyone else.
Everyone in there wants the same thing, which is for Canadians to have better food pricing and for that to cool down, and it will.
But is that the reality?
They went up there to Ottawa and tried to pretend like they're victims of inflation like the rest of us are. That's a laughable claim to make. In terms of it being a serious investigation of how this industry works, the parliamentary committee did not succeed.
Economist Jim Stanford has studied how food prices have gone up and what it means for grocers' bottom line.
The supermarkets have contributed to this inflation, absolutely. They have done more than just pass on the higher costs that they have paid for their own inputs. They've done more than that, and their profits in aggregate in Canada have more than doubled since before the pandemic.
Pre-pandemic, the entire retail food sector in Canada made about $2.4 billion in net income. Last year, that number more than doubled to over $6 billion, a record for the industry. And while inflation reached a 40-year high after the pandemic, food inflation was even higher.
For those who say grocers are profiteering, the math just doesn't add up.
Jim Stanford has some math of his own. He says his research shows that grocery profits are going up, even though Canadians are buying fewer groceries than they did before the pandemic.
And that's all the more astounding because our population has grown a lot since then. There are 2.5 million more mouths to feed in Canada today than when the pandemic hit, yet we're buying less groceries, precisely because so many Canadians can't afford it.
A key problem, consumers can't escape the big grocers. The three biggest supermarket chains own almost 2/3 of the market. The big three have multiple brands, covering everything from discount to the higher end. For instance, Loblaws owns Shoppers Drug Mart, Provigo in Quebec, and No Frills. Sobeys took over independent grocers like Longo's and Farm Boy. And Metro owns grocery store Adonis and Jean Coutu Pharmacy in Quebec. All of them sell pharmaceuticals and cosmetics in their stores too. At the hearings in Ottawa, Galen Weston told MPs that's where Loblaw was making its profits.
We've been clear. It's the efficiency of our business and the strength of categories like cosmetics, even cough and cold, that have been driving our growth, not food. These are facts.
The fact that a giant company like Loblaws doesn't just sell food, they sell pharmaceutical products and drugs and all kinds of other things, in a way just reinforces our concern that this is a company with too much market power.
Checking Weston's math isn't easy. The big grocers did give Parliament their public financial statements, but the numbers aren't broken down by category, so it's impossible to tell where they're making money. If the big grocers say they're not profiting from inflation, then who is? It became clear we needed to go beyond the numbers and start at the beginning of the supply chain.
It's in my blood. I love this way of life. I love working with my family.
4 generations of Leslie Kelley's family have worked this land. Every year they must decide what will grow best to feed the family and the business. This season they're growing wheat, canola, and lentils.
I love creating food from a little seed that is grown at our farm but shipped across the world.
That loaf of bread you buy at the grocery store, the one where the price has gone up 20%, it's made with wheat from farms like this. But Kelley says very little of what you pay makes it back to her family.
What percentage of what we pay for a loaf of bread actually goes to you, or is your share of that?
Based on a loaf of bread, whether it's whole wheat or white, it could be 8 to 15 cents that a farmer like me would get out of that loaf of bread.
What do you think about that number?
Well, when some types of bread are selling in grocery stores for $6, it can hurt.
Farmers like Kelley are what's called price takers. The processors they sell to get to determine the price, and for decades, it's barely moved. Since 1975, the price of a bushel of wheat has stayed relatively the same. But the price of the loaves of bread made with that bushel of wheat has risen steadily. According to the National Farmers Union, the gap between the two continues to grow.
I wish we were getting more of that share of wallet. Me as a mom, I also see that I'm paying way more too. In order to have food, I need to make money. And to see that in the grocery store, only getting 8 to 15 cents is a gut check. On this field, this was lentils that we harvested a few weeks ago.
So if grain farmers are not making more money from higher food prices, who is?
Before we could go further on that question, we needed to step back. Did we have a clear picture of the problem? The Competition Bureau says Canadians need more choices, that we don't have enough information to make the best decisions when buying food. And as we found out, even the information we do have may be underestimating just how expensive food has become.
Catherine Ma is a professor at Dalhousie University in Halifax. She wants Canadians to know more about what they pay for food. She and her team analyzed the prices of items in Canada's National Nutritious Food Basket. The basket helps monitor the affordability of healthy eating. StatsCan gets pricing information from 38 large urban centers. Ma chose a different approach.
Our study used digital data from a much larger sample of stores.
Using Loblaws, Canada's biggest grocery chain, Ma scraped its websites and got prices from 610 urban centers of all sizes across the country over a 2-day span. She found that Statistics Canada may actually be underestimating how much prices have gone up.
The overall cost of the basket in our study which use digital food prices across a large number of stores nationally, we found that our cost estimates for the basket were approximately $4,200 to $6,000 a year higher than Statistics Canada estimates.
So $4,000 to $6,000
on average.
On average, higher than what Statistics Canada is saying. What did you think when you saw those numbers?
It's a high number, so it's really important for us to have a conversation.
Her research found Atlantic Canada is among the most expensive regions, the other, the North, a place where one chain in particular has a huge advantage. And it's a company many in the South likely have never heard of.
And they almost doubled the price.
When we come back,
Nobody knows what's going on. I call it the Wild Wild West because anything goes pretty much.
Nunavut grocery prices. Part 48.
if Canadians in the South think their food costs are high, they need to take a look up north.
Good day. Here's what $600 worth of groceries look like in Nunavut.
High prices are a fact of life here, and the sticker shock fills an entire corner of social media. Norway House is a community in northern Manitoba with a population of almost 9,000.
We're just pulling into Norway House Cree Nation.
My colleague Brittany Guillot from APTN Investigates went there in late November to find out how locals are dealing with food prices that are even higher than before.
Like the sunsets are awesome because most of the houses are located along the shore or along the rivers of Norway House. Mm-hmm. So it's beautiful and peaceful.
Beautiful, peaceful, and very expensive.
Have you noticed the strain on your wallet in that sense?
For me, yeah, because I'm an old age pensioner. And that's what I have to survive on.
Shopping choices in Norway House are limited because there's only one store in town, the Northern.
Their prices are sky high and they don't have their shipments coming on a plane, and like it comes by, we have a all-weather road here that comes all the way here, and that's what I don't really understand, like why they would keep their prices so high.
The Northern store is at the center of daily life here.
How many people are you going to be able to feed?
With this, I chop it up and I make a big pot of stew and probably around 10 people.
10 people, okay.
Yeah.
As part of our co-production, APTN investigative reporter Brittany Guillot and I met in Toronto to go over the Northwest Company's numbers.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. So it looks like in 2022, they reported $1.3 billion in sales in Canada, which is a pretty significant number.
Supplies are taken to historic Fort Norway House.
The store is part of a chain owned by the Northwest Company, a billion-dollar business with operations around the world. And it's the biggest player in Canada's north. The Northwest Company traces its roots back to the 18th century.
They're still operating stores on the same site of their original trading posts.
Tracy Galloway is a health researcher from the University of Toronto. She's published a number of peer-reviewed papers on northern Indigenous communities and often encounters the Northwest Company. The company has more than 100 stores across northern Canada.
There's really limited competition in northern communities in terms of retail stores. In our recent research, we were looking at a subset of those communities, 83 of them. And in those communities, there were 35 communities that had only one store. In 30 of those 35 communities, it was a Northwest Company store.
The company has a big presence in Iqaluit. One former employee tells the Fifth Estate the Northwest Company store there set its prices any way it wanted.
Nobody knows what's going on. I call it the Wild Wild West because anything goes pretty much, and they take advantage of that nobody's really looking, and it's pretty much free for all.
Almost white?
Up until recently, Alexis Dodd worked for Northwest in Iqaluit. Now she works for a local food program, helping feed elders in the community. This is the first time she has spoken publicly about her former employer.
Why did you feel it was necessary to speak out?
What I do for the elders, I see how much they struggle. I see every day, like the community, they're all my family. Like it's really hard to see people not even be able to afford an actual orange, like literally having to go and put an orange in their pocket because they can't afford the $7 orange from Northmart. It's very sad.
A key part of her job, change the price tags on products in the store. And soon, she says, she noticed a worrying trend.
I noticed there was consistent price increases of almost double, and I started mentioning that to head office, and head office started fighting back a little bit because it's not my job to question the pricing.
She was so outraged by price increases that she decided to document them herself, taking hundreds of pictures before changing stickers, like this one for olive oil.
Yeah.
So what are we seeing here?
So we're seeing the original cost of the olive oil on the bottom, the $16.49. That was originally what the cost was on November 9th, 2022. And if you go look at the top one, that is the new price that's been dropped from head office in a batch on December 31st, 2022. And it's gone up $6 or so.
She points out that non-perishables come in by ship. So-called sea lift deliveries happen only once or twice a year, so transportation costs for those sea lift items shouldn't fluctuate and affect price.
What do you think when you see this kind of price increase over that amount of time?
It makes you ask a lot of questions because you know that they aren't paying more for receiving their freight from down south, so it makes you wonder why that cost has gone up so significantly.
In a statement to the Fifth Estate, the Northwest Company said, when items like olive oil have their sea lift stock depleted, it can be the case that an item will increase in price when it is flown in via air, given the higher cost of transportation.
Did you ever show any of these photos to your managers?
Yes, I would also create tickets and send some of these in and say, this pricing just doesn't look right.
And what was their response to that?
Often I was told, it's not my business, just deal with it.
Yeah, down here it says, well, in the short...
The company insists it's facing the same struggles as other northerners, that it has much higher expenses than southern grocers, everything from rent, utilities and construction materials, to transportation.
The company will say that transportation, fuel costs, getting items up to the north is not an easy task, and that justifies the price increases. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely not.
Why
no.
not?
In that pricing system, you can see how much the freight and everything costs to bring it up. And typically, I can understand water being expensive because it is heavy, but other items, that is what the northern subsidy is supposed to be for, so that it's not overly expensive.
That subsidy is provided by a federal program called Nutrition North Canada. Tracy Galloway is the country's top expert on the program.
Nutrition North Canada is a federal subsidy, and its goal is to make sure that food is available and affordable in remote northern communities. And it's been around since 2011, but in fact, we've had a subsidy in northern communities for decades.
The previous program, called Food Mail, was run through Canada Post.
Prior to 2011-12, the goal of the subsidy was to make sure freight costs were managed. Right? In 2012, the new subsidy, Nutrition North Canada, came into effect, and the subsidy dollars are paid directly to retailers, and it's up to the retailers to make sure they manage their own freight arrangements in ways that keep the cost of food down for people living in northern communities.
The idea of the new program was to improve nutrition, address food insecurity, and bring prices down. Galloway says it failed to deliver.
Not only did food insecurity go up after the implementation of Nutrition North Canada, which is, totally not what it was supposed to do, but fruit and vegetable consumption went down. And part of the reason for that is people cannot afford fruit and vegetables, and those are subsidized items. Right? So we really need to do something better for these folks who live in these remote northern communities, and we have to do it now.
Since 2011, the federal government has spent almost $1 billion on this subsidy, money that goes directly to several northern retailers. But Galloway questions how much is passed through to consumers. She found that for each dollar of subsidy, the retailers are passing on an average of only 67 cents. So a third of the subsidy can't be accounted for.
And where does the rest of that money go?
We don't know. I mean, in our write-up, we call it leakage, but it appears that the retailer may be keeping the extra money.
A 2020 study from researchers at the University of Guelph found about 91 cents of every dollar gets passed along. Galloway says her research method was different.
So they were comparing the prices in communities to some baseline prices in the city of Ottawa. We haven't done that. We're actually looking at prices in the same community. So in the same community, if a basket of goods receives an extra dollar in subsidy funds, does the price of that basket of goods go down by $1? And what we find is it goes down by about 67 cents.
Nutrition North has long been a source of controversy in the North. The federal government established an advisory board in 2011 to give isolated communities a voice. Born in Iqaluit, Beth Kutuk is a Nook and a civil lawyer. She joined the advisory board in 2021.
I always knew that it needed improvement, and I think when I joined, I was a little bit more optimistic that I would be able to learn more about how it works and then also steer it in a way that it could become more effective.
But after 2.5 years, this past December, Kutuk resigned.
Do you think Nutrition North works?
No, no, I don't think it works. That subsidy itself is given to the retailers, and it does not pass through to individuals or family members or households, people that are in need of that subsidy.
She says when she raised questions or tried to get more information about the subsidy and how it worked, she was stonewalled by the program's bureaucracy.
We're trying to find ways for it to be more transparent and more accountable. And it really felt like it was just being put off. You can ask the question, sure, go ahead, ask all the questions you want, but we're not actually going to do anything about it. So at the end of the day, why bother? That's really how I felt.
She says the lack of oversight and transparency behind pricing in Northwest stores became obvious during the 2021 water crisis in Iqaluit.
So there's a lot of people posting at that time saying, I went to Northern to go buy, or Northmart in Iqaluit, and to go buy water, and it was much more expensive than it used to be. So there's a lot of like these murmurs and these rumors of water prices being jacked up while we're in a water crisis. And that's unfortunately the nature of it, right? We can have our suspicions that that's what they're up to, but then at the end of the day, who's got the evidence?
Residents have been scrambling to get water from the river and from the stores who have unsurprisingly jacked up their water prices.
Northmart had the audacity to double their water prices.
Northwest disputes that. In a statement to the Fifth Estate, it says, "The information you have received is completely inaccurate and not based on facts. When the water crisis was announced, we locked in water prices at sea lift prices, despite working to fly in product, which is a higher cost of transportation." Water is not covered by the Nutrition North subsidy, and Alexis Dodd says during her time at the company, the price would fluctuate.
In the 2 years that I worked for or just under 2 years I worked for Northmart, I've seen the price increase from $36 on a pack of 24 bottles of water up to $56.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's almost double.
That's almost double, yeah.
Like Canada's other grocers, the Northwest Company was reporting record earnings. Its earnings in Canada increased by 120% in 10 years, rising from $69 million in 2011 to $153 million in 2021. However, it dipped slightly to $119 million in 2022.
So if they made a profit of $119 million, I can tell you that they also received about $67 million in federal subsidy to sell food in those communities. So that subsidy it appears to be contributing to their bottom line.
What do you think when you see that?
Yeah, I think that's pretty concerning. And I think what it tells us is this form of subsidy, paying the retailers directly and then expecting them to act in good faith and pass on the value of the subsidy, may not be working. We may need stricter accountability measures within the subsidy to make sure that in fact happens.
But all of this is happening far from Ottawa's eyes. Despite numerous parliamentary hearings on food prices, none of the northern retailers testified.
Well, I think that just sort of replicates an old habit of not thinking about the north, not looking toward the north because the population is smaller. But the acuity of the problem in the north is really high, and it's been high for a long time.
The situation has meant some northern residents are returning to the old communal ways to get by.
Yeah, I watched my grandparents make a meal out of nothing. Like they can have a few potatoes and like vegetables and like a chunk of meat, and they can feed a whole family. And then they used to just leave a big pot, and whoever came in, like they were free to eat. So I still live by that.
When we come back, while consumers are struggling to make ends meet, another group is also feeling the squeeze from the big grocers.
Because there's so much power and volume accumulated within so few hands, they are the gatekeepers of who succeeds and who doesn't, who reaches the average Canadian and who doesn't.
In 1986, there were 8 large grocery chains across Canada. Each was owned by a different company. Today, we're down to 5, and 3 of them, Loblaws, Empire, and Metro, control close to 60% of the market. It gives them a certain level of control over consumers, but also over other parts of the supply chain.
When you've got an industry where a small number of players, 3 big players in the case of supermarkets, has so much power, they can stick it to everyone. They obviously can stick it to the consumers with higher prices. They can stick it to suppliers, particularly smaller suppliers, who they can, basically say, look, if you want to get your products on our shelves, you're going to have to make a deal with us.
Because there's so much power and volume accumulated within so few hands, they are the gatekeepers of who succeeds and who doesn't, who reaches the average Canadian and who doesn't.
This supplier manufactures a packaged snack and sells it to one of the biggest grocers in Canada.
I'm talking to you now, and there's a screen. We're seeing you in shadow. Why aren't you able to reveal your identity?
There's very few, if any, people in the supply chain who are willing to actually speak out against the practices with retailers for fear of some form of negative reaction or retribution that could come back and completely damage their business.
Yeah, what is the fear? What's the worst case scenario?
Complete removal from store shelves.
If the retail section was very dispersed among many small companies, no single company would be able to do that, because the food manufacturer would just go down the street and say, well, if you won't take it, I think I've got a good product, and I think this store down the street is going to take it.
The Fifth Estate spoke with some medium and small suppliers who say they don't stand a chance against the big grocers. First, there's the fees. Suppliers pay listing fees just to get their products on store shelves, thousands of dollars. And there's something called chargebacks, where the grocer makes the supplier pay extra for issues that arise. Everything from delivery and packing issues to the product not selling.
They tend to often seem like they're made up to pad sometimes their profits, but again, obviously not 100% are. A lot of them could be legitimate. It's just the ones that aren't. It gets very frustrating and difficult to actually get any sort of backup or answer as to what they are.
This supplier says the response they get from the company rep isn't always helpful.
You'll see a chargeback and you'll question it, but you won't get any answers.
Sometimes no, and sometimes they'll just try and justify it, and that's all there is to it. But you can't really win.
Only giant multinationals seem to have leverage over the big three grocers. Take the battle over potato chips in 2022. PepsiCo, which owns major brands like Lay's, Cheetos, and Ruffles, wanted to raise its prices due to higher costs. Loblaws refused, said it needed to keep prices low for consumers. So PepsiCo pulled its product from Loblaws' shelves. Eventually, the two sides reached a deal. Our source says in their company's case, the battle over pricing played out in a much different way. You had an instance when you went into the store to see your product. Tell me what you saw.
The price had been elevated at one particular retailer.
How much it had gone up?
At least $1, and then the week after it was $2.
And were these prices that you had set?
No.
So how did you explain, or how did you find out what happened?
Just by going into the store, that's how you find out generally. And we have no control over how the pricing is set at the retail level generally.
How did it make you feel?
Definitely upset because it wouldn't sell at that price. And if it doesn't sell, like I said, I'm liable. It would hurt me in my business.
And were you ever given an explanation as to why the price was increased?
They don't have to give any explanation.
And you asked, you tried?
Oh yeah.
So how can suppliers even the field with the big players? In Canada, the industry is drafting a grocery code of conduct. The goal? Create new rules to ensure fairness and transparency between large retailers and suppliers. Lowering prices isn't necessarily the goal of the code, but it could be a result if grocers follow the rules. But right now, the code as it's being debated in Canada is voluntary.
The UK started looking into this more than 2 decades ago, so we wanted to talk to Christine Taken, the UK's first grocery code adjudicator. Her job, make sure the code actually worked and companies complied.
I had the power to arbitrate, and I also had the power to investigate and to fine.
Even though she only needed to conduct 2 investigations in 7 years, she said her role had a major impact. Grocers paid suppliers on time, could no longer threaten to take products off shelves, and on price.
I mean, if you look statistically, prices went down, as a nation, but whether that was driven by the code or not, I think that's going to be very hard ever to try and pull out. What I am totally confident in is that I pointed out to loads of inefficiencies.
At the parliamentary hearings in Ottawa, all the grocery leaders were on board with a voluntary code, including Galen Weston of Loblaw.
We're active participants in the development of the Code of Conduct.
But in December, as the draft neared its final stages and was endorsed by Metro and Empire, Loblaw dropped a bombshell. In a letter, Chief Financial Officer Richard Dufresne sounded a seemingly dire warning. We believe that the draft code runs a significant risk of contributing to higher food prices for Canadians, potentially leading to product shortages and empty shelves, concluding that the code could potentially add over $1 billion in costs for consumers.
We had a few scare stories like that in the UK, and none of it actually came into effect. The retailers were saying that there would be a cost of implementation and that there would be an impact on consumer prices, which would go up if the code was enforced by an adjudicator. No, opposite happened.
In a statement to the Fifth Estate on the grocery code, the company said, "Our goal is to ensure it's in the best interest of everyone, particularly consumers. We remain laser-focused on delivering lower prices for Canadians."
So could you tell this committee why you won't sign the code and what needs to be done to get you to sign the code? Yes, please.
So we absolutely will sign the code. We've always said that we would sign the code. We just need to sign a code that doesn't increase the risk of higher food prices to Canadians. And as the code is currently drafted, our strong conviction is that it will do so.
The UK's experience offers a hint as to why companies may not welcome a code of conduct. Take all those fees and chargebacks grocers hold over suppliers. They can add to a company's bottom line. But when their code of conduct came into force, many of those charges were eliminated.
I think one of the retailers said they found out they had 30 different ways of charging suppliers for things, and then by the time they'd finished looking at all the issues that I was raising, they'd got down to 3.
Taken underlines, a voluntary code doesn't work. It needs to be mandatory and have someone enforcing it.
Well, we had the code for 3 years and they didn't. It was only when we had an adjudicator that things started to change.
When we come back,
Who's holding the Northwest Company accountable? Isn't that your job?
hunting for food in the North has been the traditional way of life here. Some believe more support for hunting and gathering is one way to address rising food prices. Another idea, work together to compete with the Northwest Company.
At this time, I'd like to invite everybody his name's on the document to come up.
An idea hashed out at a meeting in Winnipeg in December.
What we're looking to do is actually, as a collective, as a group, to actually start buying wholesale. And once we're able to buy wholesale, that's an additional savings for our community members as well as the local store owners.
A member of Constance Lake First Nation in Northern Ontario, David Negan is one of the initiative's leaders. He says their hope is to lower prices, but also increase access to nutritious and healthy food.
There's going to be competition, and then the prices are going to drop. And for what that means for families is that they have more buying power to buy milk or the basic staples for life.
The Harvesters Support Program is being done in cooperation with Nutrition North. That's a controversial program that some say isn't adequately overseeing the companies receiving its subsidy.
Now you welcome them to your communities.
At the conference, we met Wayne Walsh. He's in charge of Nutrition North Canada. He sat down with APTN Investigates to address some of the concerns over whether the Nutrition North subsidy is working. We started with Tracy Galloway's 2023 findings, that retailers like the Northwest Company aren't passing along a part of the subsidy.
A University of Toronto professor has come out with new research that suggests for every $1 in subsidy, 33 cents is not passed down to the consumer. How do you respond to that finding?
So we're aware of the report, and the program officials are reviewing the report and doing the analysis. There's also another report that's out that their findings showed that there was over 90% of the subsidy was passed down. So we got to look at both reports, and if there's an issue, we'll definitely have to address it to make sure that the subsidy is passed on.
So the Northwest Company reported $119 million in profits, and they received $67 million in subsidies. What's your reaction when you see the Northwest Company's profits?
I mean, the Northwest Company, Arctic Co-op, I mean, all the retailers under the program are for-profit organizations. I'm not in a position to determine whether that's appropriate or not. It's, I think it's also up to the consumer to decide if the level of profit is acceptable or not, and make choices where they can.
Who's holding the Northwest Company accountable? Isn't that your job?
So our job is to ensure that the money that we provide under the subsidy is used according to the parameters of the program.
What we find when we review those measures are
Tracy Galloway says Nutrition North's oversight needs work.
There's no teeth, right? There aren't punishments. There's no threat that a retailer would be removed from the program, because ultimately that would have a negative effect on consumers in a place that would further lessen competition in these remote northern communities.
We contacted the Northwest Company, which has its headquarters in Winnipeg. The company refused our repeated request for an on-camera interview. In a statement, it said that Tracy Galloway's report did not accurately take into account all factors which impact pricing, and that a recent government audit found the funding provided was spent for the intended purposes.
The federal government says it's working on lowering food prices. It's given the Competition Bureau more power to oversee the big grocers. And the industry minister says he's looking for foreign companies to set up here to give Canadians more choices.
The government has said, if we don't see some satisfactory response, we're going to look at an excess profits tax like we've done in other industries, or other more powerful measures to try and reduce food prices for Canadians. And so I think the CEOs understand that this is a real challenge to them, and we'll see whether they respond with anything meaningful or not.
Every night during harvest season, farmer Leslie Kelley works to put healthy food out for her family and her crew. She hopes she can keep farming for a long time, and just maybe some of those record profits others in the food system seem to be enjoying will find their way here.
To bring out supper for my family and our friends that help us out at harvest, this is really all that it comes down to. Fueling our farmers and feeding our farmers that feed Canadians and those across the world. This, what I feel like, is where I'm supposed to be and what I'm supposed to be doing. This is all what it's about for me.